Welcome to the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast, the show designed to serve you up evidence-based sports nutrition advice from the experts. Hi, I'm your host Taryn, accredited practicing dietitian, advanced sports dietitian, and founder of Dietitian Approved. Listen as I break down the latest evidence to give you practical, easy to digest strategies to train hard, recover faster, and perform at your best. You have so much potential, and I want to help you unlock that with the power of nutrition. Let's get into it. In the literature, we've seen some benefits to some health markers in the general population. So things like weight loss, reducing blood pressure, and some improvements in markers in metabolic risk. So it makes sense why it's piqued people's interest in doing it as a strategy to improve our overall health outcomes. So what actually is intermittent fasting? Why would you want to do it? And should you do it as an endurance athlete? We actually have some really beautiful literature in intermittent fasting because Muslims all over the world fast every year for Ramadan. It's a month-long period where there's no food or liquid consumed during daylight hours. And that has given us a really good understanding about intermittent fasting and sports because Olympics and other events often align with Ramadan. London 2012 coincided with Ramadan, so there was a lot of research that went into preparing athletes across the world from different countries. They were all doing their own research and assisting their own athletes to perform as best as they could in London. So there's many definitions of what intermittent fasting is. There is lots of different ways to do it. The 16-8 diet consists of fasting for 16 consecutive hours and then eating ad libitum, so as you want, for 8 of those hours. There's the 5-2 diet, which is an alternative day fasting protocol where one day you have no or very minimal calories and then days consisting of food and liquid consumption, again, ad libitum. Now, that can work for some people if they don't go crazy for the days that they are eating, but can also be crazy for people that have no structure and control. There's things like 20 hours of fasting and only a 4-hour window of eating. And then there's everything in between, 18 and 6, every other day fasting, whatever it is. People are making up their own rules. And there's no one clear method or way that seems to be better than the others. For people that do fast, it is really just about fitting it into your lifestyle in a way that is sustainable and maintainable. So physiologically, what happens when we fast? We actually know quite a bit, again, about physiologically what happens in the beginning of the fasting period. The first phase in fasting consists of this post-absorptive phase, which begins at around 3 to 8 hours into the fast, depending on the makeup and quantity of the last meal that you had, and that lasts about 12 to 18 hours. During this period, the blood glucose level is maintained by glycogenolysis, which is where we break down our storage form of carbohydrate, glycogen, into glucose, and we use our liver stores first. Then, to keep up with the body's metabolic rate, which appears to be the same for the first period of fasting, we have also whole body lipolysis, which is where fat stores are broken down into their individual components, so free fatty acids, and our fat oxidation increases. So we have this increase in free fatty acids kicking around in our bloodstream, which becomes the source of fuel for our muscles. Interestingly, protein metabolism doesn't seem to be affected in the short term by fasting, but we don't know what happens long term. The energy used in those first 2 to 3 days of fasting appears to come from glycogen, so carbohydrate, and fat stores, and our protein catabolism or breakdown doesn't seem to increase until about 36 hours into fasting, which is so interesting. Now, it might take more than 10 days for the body to adapt to intermittent fasting. What we don't really know is what happens long term. So as an active person, we're not talking about general population stuff right now. We're talking about you as a triathlete. What do we know about our performance if we are trying to fast and do exercise. So there's a lot of literature around the different modalities of exercise. When it comes to high intensity exercise, so things like cycling to exhaustion or sprinting, both of those are very dependent on carbohydrate availability. So obviously there's a concern if you're fasting with high intensity exercise. And the majority of research in this space is done in athletes fasting for Ramadan, which does show a decrease in sprint performance. So both impaired speed and power with fasting. And as an endurance athlete, there are some really good papers to draw on to decide whether this is something that would be useful or beneficial for you. There was a big review done by Aragon and Vargas in 1993. I'll link it in the show notes if you want to get nerdy and read it. But they looked at fasting anywhere from 24 hours to 4 days and the effects on endurance performance. Now, they saw with this big review that there were negative effects in all but one study. Since then, Ed et al. 2018 did another big systematic review and meta-analysis. I'll link it in the show notes as well. But this type of study is the highest level of research quality, a meta-analysis. They found 22 studies that fell into their categorization of what they wanted to look at on the effects of fasting and performance. So they looked at fasting overnight in this review, so 8 hours, and they actually excluded Ramadan because that helps us to avoid confounding factors. So things like lack of sleep, which happen during Ramadan, because if you can only eat in the dark, then you're probably going to forgo sleep to get enough calories in or get some food in so you're not starving. We also see a reduction in calorie intake during Ramadan typically. So they removed Ramadan studies from their review so that we didn't have those confounding factors like not sleeping well and not eating enough, that both of them are going to affect performance. Interestingly, what they found, 54% of studies discovered that pre-exercise feeding improved exercise performance during anything that was continuous and aerobic exercise, so longer than 60 minutes. And the remainder showed no significant difference. For aerobic sessions that were less than 60 minutes, 57% of studies found no difference in performance between fed and fasted conditions, which makes sense. And the rest, the other 43%, found that feeding before exercise improved performance. So what that tells us is that fasting doesn't improve performance. It either has a neutral effect or it has a negative effect. So if I lost you there for a little bit with numbers, in summary, as a triathlete who is an endurance athlete and also has elements of high intensity, high performance sessions, if you want to perform in your sport, then I probably wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting. Studies don't show clear, uniform results, but one thing is clear, that fasting doesn't improve any type of athletic performance. Research either has a negative or a neutral effect. We definitely do need to do research in a longer term sense. What does longer term fasting do to our bodies and performance? But if you're somebody that has come from a non-triathlon background and has found intermittent fasting worked for you before the sport, it is unlikely to do you any advantage when you then try and layer triathlon training into that. We really need to think about our nutrition so much more differently when we're setting ourselves up to train for 3 sports in a week. We need to think about our pre-training nutrition, our recovery nutrition for all of our training sessions. And if you're fasting through a pre-training, the session, and then recovery, then you're losing all of those beautiful adaptations that we can get from our training if we intersect our nutrition in to support that. You're not priming the body ready to train hard either if you are fasting. That big meta-analysis shows really clearly that you will do a better training session if you fuel it. And we know that the shorter duration, very aerobic stuff is either not going to have an effect or there's no difference if you fast versus fuel. So you really need to look at your programming and go, what sessions am I fueling? What sessions am I fasting? And be strategic around that rather than just fasting all the time or just fueling all the time. You actually need to set those up with strategy to get the most out of them. And it all depends on your overall body composition goals as well. I know intermittent fasting is a way for people to not eat, and so it gives them some rules and guidelines around when they can eat and when they can't. And that generally helps to restrict calories. But we can do that so easily just by understanding how to eat to support our training and eating the right building blocks for our body rather than filling it up with junk. The other thing to consider is I've heard of a lot of people say they're fasting, but they wake up in the morning and they have a milky coffee. You are no longer fasting if you've put milk in your coffee. You can have a black coffee, or a lot of people do what's called a bulletproof coffee where they're adding fats to their coffee. But as soon as you've put carbohydrate in your mouth, you are turning on that switch to use carbohydrate as a fuel source, and so you're no longer in that fasted state. Makes no sense to say you're fasting to lunchtime, but you've broken your fast by having a milky coffee. So the bottom line is, I wouldn't recommend it if you're a triathlete. If you are the general population, maybe, but there are so many other ways that you can reach your goals, whether it's body composition or overall health or metabolic markers or whatever it is, without having to restrict your window of eating. You just need to know how to build your plate real estate for what you need, not what you can eat. So any questions on fasting, send me a DM. I'm happy to chat about it. I will link these papers in the show notes if you do want to get down and dirty in the research. They're both really well done, but it's not something I would recommend for you. And if you are doing it, then maybe come and join us in the academy and I can show you how to eat to support training without having to starve yourself all day and do a shit job of training support and do a crap job of supporting your training with the right building blocks. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Triathlon Nutrition Academy podcast. I would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want to share with me what you've learnt, email me at podcast@dietitianapproved.com. You could also spread the word by leaving me a review and taking a screenshot of you listening to the show. Don't forget to tag me on social media at dietitian.approved so I can give you a shout out too. If you want to learn more about what we do, head to dietitianapproved.com. And if you want to learn more about the Triathlon Nutrition Academy program, head to dietitianapproved.com/academy. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to helping you smash it in the fourth leg. Nutrition!